Ladies and gentlemen, today we stand at the crossroads of history, a moment where the past echoes in the cries of our people, and the future shines with the promise of hope. Tears and Hope for Africa is not just a phrase, it is a reflection of the struggles and dreams of an entire continent. In this powerful and emotional speech by Ibrahim Traoré, we witness a voice that speaks for the oppressed, for those yearning for dignity, sovereignty, and true independence. His words are not mere sentences, they are a call to action, a call to break the chains of exploitation, to rise against injustice, and to reclaim the destiny of Africa. Today, as we revisit these words, let us ask ourselves, can the tears of today water the seeds of hope for tomorrow? The struggle for true African sovereignty is deeply rooted in the history of the continent, shaped by centuries of colonization, exploitation, and systemic control. Despite gaining political independence in the mid-20th century, many African nations continue to face the harsh reality that independence on paper does not always translate to genuine sovereignty. The remnants of colonial structures still linger, embedded within economic systems, governance models, and even cultural mindsets. These remnants have created a situation where external powers still exert influence over African resources, policies, and leadership decisions. This indirect control is often masked under the guise of economic aid, trade agreements, or security partnerships. Yet it perpetuates a cycle of dependency that prevents Africa from determining its own destiny. True sovereignty means more than having a flag, a national anthem, and a seat at the United Nations. It is the ability to control one's resources, set independent policies, and make decisions without external coercion or manipulation. Unfortunately, much of Africa's wealth, its minerals, oil, fertile lands, and even its people, remains under the control of multinational corporations and foreign interests. These entities profit immensely from Africa's abundance, while the majority of Africans remain in poverty. This reality exposes the gap between political independence and economic sovereignty. As Ibrahim Traoré highlighted, freedom cannot be celebrated when resources are extracted for the benefit of others, leaving the original owners with nothing but misery and struggle. The legacy of colonialism laid the foundation for this imbalance. Artificial borders divided communities and created states that were easier to control. Colonial powers installed systems that ensured resources flowed outward to Europe and other parts of the world. When independence movements emerged, they were often met with resistance, violence, and strategies to maintain influence even after colonial administrators left. Today, that influence manifests in loans with harsh conditions, foreign military presence, and policies dictated by global financial institutions. These mechanisms have trapped many African countries in a state of neocolonialism, independence in appearance, dependence in practice. Another major challenge is the control over decision-making by external powers. Many African governments cannot implement policies that serve their people without interference or pressure from outside forces. Whether through economic sanctions, political manipulation, or military interventions, powerful nations and international organizations often dictate what is acceptable for African states to do. This lack of autonomy cripples development because policies are designed to benefit others rather than address the real needs of African citizens. For instance, while the continent produces vast amounts of raw materials, it imports finished products at higher prices, creating an economic imbalance that benefits the manufacturers outside Africa. This is not a sign of sovereignty, but a symptom of dependency. True sovereignty also demands the ability to defend one's territory and people. Yet security in many African nations is compromised due to foreign interventions disguised as peacekeeping missions or counterterrorism operations. While these efforts claim to promote stability, they often serve strategic interests of external actors. In some cases, foreign troops operate on African soil without full transparency or accountability, raising questions about who truly controls these territories. Such situations further erode sovereignty and deepen mistrust between governments and their citizens. Another dimension of the struggle for sovereignty is the mental and cultural aspect. For centuries, colonial systems imposed foreign languages, education models, and cultural values on African societies. These systems were designed to create dependency and undermine indigenous knowledge and traditions. Even today, many African nations prioritize Western validation in areas such as governance, education, and economic development. This cultural dependency reinforces the notion that progress can only come from adopting foreign models, instead of embracing homegrown solutions. Breaking free from this mindset is essential for achieving genuine independence. Economic control is perhaps the most critical factor in this struggle. Africa is one of the richest continents in terms of natural resources, yet it remains among the poorest in terms of development indicators. This paradox exists because resource extraction is dominated by external powers. Multinational corporations exploit oil, gas, gold, and rare minerals, while leaving behind environmental destruction and minimal benefits for local communities. Contracts are often signed under unfair terms, with corruption and weak governance enabling the exploitation to continue. If Africa cannot control its wealth, then it cannot fund its own development, build infrastructure, or invest in its people. This dependence on external funding creates a vicious cycle where loans and aid come with conditions that compromise sovereignty even further. The question of sovereignty is also tied to leadership and accountability. African leaders have a responsibility to prioritize the interests of their people over foreign agendas. However, history shows that some leaders have collaborated with external powers for personal gain, undermining the collective struggle for independence. Corruption, weak institutions, and lack of unity have made it easier for foreign actors to manipulate internal affairs. This has led to instability, coups, and conflicts that weaken states and make them more vulnerable to external control. Building strong, transparent institutions and promoting leadership that resists foreign domination is crucial for breaking this cycle. Regional integration is another key factor in the fight for sovereignty. Individually, many African countries lack the economic and military power to resist external influence. However, by uniting under regional organizations and strengthening intra-African trade, the continent can increase its bargaining power and reduce dependency on external actors. Initiatives like the African Continental Free Trade Area, AfCFTA, aim to create a single market, which would allow African nations to trade more with each other rather than rely on imports from outside. Such efforts are steps toward reclaiming sovereignty, but they require strong political will and cooperation among nations. Technology and innovation also play a critical role in achieving sovereignty. In a globalized world, control over digital infrastructure and technology is as important as control over land and resources. Currently, much of Africa's technological infrastructure is owned or dominated by foreign companies. This creates vulnerabilities in communication, finance, and governance systems. Developing indigenous technological solutions and protecting digital sovereignty is an essential part of the struggle for independence in the modern era. Unity as the key to liberation has been a recurring theme in Africa's historical and political discourse, yet its importance remains as urgent today as it was during the fight for independence. The fragmentation of the continent into numerous states, each with its own borders, languages, and governance systems, has created an environment where collective progress is often hindered by division. These divisions, rooted in the colonial era, were deliberately designed to weaken African societies and prevent them from presenting a united front against imperial powers. Today, the lack of unity continues to serve as one of the greatest obstacles to Africa's full liberation and development. The concept of unity goes beyond the symbolic gestures of continental solidarity. It encompasses political cooperation, economic integration, cultural alignment, and shared security strategies. When African nations operate in isolation, they become vulnerable to exploitation by more powerful external actors. Individually, many states have limited bargaining power on the global stage, but collectively, the continent possesses immense economic and strategic potential. However, realizing this potential requires breaking down the artificial barriers that separate African countries from one another and embracing the idea of interdependence as a strength rather than a weakness. The dream of unity was championed by African visionaries such as Kwame Nkrumah, who advocated for a united Africa as the only path to true independence. He warned that political freedom without economic unity would leave Africa susceptible to neocolonial control. Decades later, his prediction has proven accurate. While most African countries gained, political independency has persisted, and foreign influence continues to shape critical policies. This is because individual nations often negotiate trade deals, security arrangements, and development partnerships on their own, leaving them at a disadvantage. Unity could change this dynamic by allowing Africa to speak with one voice in global affairs, setting terms that prioritize the continent's interests. Economic integration is one of the most practical ways unity can manifest. The African Continental Free Trade Area, AfCFTA, is an example of an effort aimed at reducing trade barriers among African nations, creating a single market for goods and services. If fully implemented, it could transform the continent into an economic powerhouse by enabling countries to trade more with each other rather than relying heavily on imports from outside. Currently, intra-African trade remains low compared to other regions of the world, meaning that African economies depend significantly on external markets. This dependency undermines sovereignty and makes the continent vulnerable to global economic shocks. By promoting regional trade and industrialization, Africa can build stronger economies that serve its own people first. Unity is equally important in the realm of security. Many African countries face internal and cross-border conflicts, often fueled by external interests or the competition for resources. These conflicts weaken states and divert resources away from development. A united security strategy, underpinned by cooperation among African nations, could help prevent such conflicts and reduce reliance on foreign military intervention. When African countries depend on external forces for peacekeeping or counter-terrorism, they compromise their sovereignty and allow foreign powers to dictate the terms of security. A continental approach rooted in shared responsibility and coordinated action would not only strengthen Africa's defense, but also reinforce the principle of self-reliance. Cultural unity also plays a significant role in the liberation struggle. Africa is rich in diversity with thousands of languages and ethnic groups, but this diversity should not be a source of division. Hope in this context is rooted in the belief that Africans have the capacity to determine their destiny, reclaim their resources, and build societies based on equality and justice. However, hope alone is not enough. If it is not translated into tangible efforts, it risks becoming mere rhetoric. This is where responsibility comes in, the responsibility of current generations to ensure that the continent is not trapped in cycles of dependency, corruption, and underdevelopment. One of the most significant responsibilities lies in the management of Africa's natural wealth. The continent is abundantly blessed with resources such as minerals, oil, fertile lands, and renewable energy potential. Yet these blessings have often turned into curses because of mismanagement and exploitation by foreign powers and local elites. For future generations to thrive, today's leaders and citizens must take ownership of these resources and use them to build sustainable economies. 2. This means renegotiating exploitative contracts, promoting local industries, and ensuring that profits from natural resources are invested in education, healthcare, and infrastructure rather than siphoned off through corruption or foreign control. Education stands as another cornerstone of responsibility. The future of Africa depends on an educated and skilled population capable of driving innovation and creating solutions for local challenges. Unfortunately, many education systems in Africa remain underfunded and outdated, failing to equip young people with the tools they need to compete in a globalized world. Investing in education is not a luxury. It is a necessity for survival and progress. This includes not only expanding access to schools, but also improving quality, promoting critical thinking, and encouraging research that addresses African realities. By doing so, Africa can produce a generation that is not only hopeful, but also empowered to turn that hope into reality. Health and well-being are equally vital. A healthy population is the foundation of productivity and social stability. Yet, millions of Africans still lack access to basic healthcare, clean water, and sanitation. The responsibility to improve healthcare systems and ensure universal access is a moral imperative. It requires strong governance, transparency, and the prioritization of public welfare over private gain. Without healthy citizens, the dream of a prosperous Africa remains distant, no matter how abundant its resources may be. Another critical area of responsibility is governance. Corruption, political instability, and poor leadership have plagued many African countries, undermining progress and eroding trust in institutions. To secure a better future, Africans must demand accountability from their leaders and actively participate in shaping governance systems that are inclusive, transparent, and just. This responsibility does not rest solely with governments. Civil society, youth movements, and the private sector also have roles to play in promoting ethical leadership and resisting the influence of external powers that seek to exploit divisions. Hope for future generations also requires addressing environmental challenges. Climate change poses a severe threat to Africa, impacting agriculture, water resources, and livelihoods. Rising temperatures, desertification, and extreme weather events are already displacing communities and straining economies. Responsibility means implementing sustainable practices, investing in renewable energy, and protecting natural ecosystems. Africa has the opportunity to lead in green innovation, but this will only happen if governments and citizens prioritize long-term environmental security over short-term economic gains. Future generations should inherit a continent that is livable, not one devastated by ecological neglect. Technology and digital transformation present both an opportunity and a responsibility. In a world increasingly driven by data and connectivity, Africa cannot afford to be left behind. Embracing technology can accelerate development, improve governance, and create new economic opportunities. However, dependence on foreign technology without building local capacity would replicate old patterns of dependency. The responsibility lies in developing homegrown solutions, investing in digital infrastructure, and ensuring that technological progress benefits all citizens, not just a privileged few. By doing so, Africa can harness innovation to leapfrog traditional barriers to development. Cultural preservation and identity also form part of the responsibility toward future generations. In the pursuit of modernization, there is a risk of losing the rich heritage that defines African societies. Language, traditions, and indigenous knowledge systems are not obstacles to progress. They are assets that can enrich development. Embracing cultural identity strengthens social cohesion and counters the lingering effects of colonial domination that sought to erase African heritage. Responsibility means passing down this heritage to future generations while equipping them to engage with a globalized world on their own terms. The youth of Africa, who make up the majority of the population, are central to this vision of hope and responsibility. They are the custodians of the future, but they need opportunities to realize their potential. High unemployment, lack of access to quality education, and political exclusion threaten to turn the youth demographic advantage into a liability. Addressing these challenges requires targeted policies that create jobs, foster entrepreneurship, and include young people in decision-making processes. Empowering the youth is not just an investment in individuals, it is an investment in the continent's stability and prosperity.